The default camera app sees some definite improvements over the initial version from last year. The different camera modes are now laid out at the bottom, similar to the iOS camera app, and can be switched between by swiping sideways on the display. You only see some modes by default and the rest are inside the More option at the right. At the top are the controls for timer, motion mode, Google's version of Apple's Live View, white balance and flash settings. You can choose to show HDR plus controls here, which lets you choose from HDR plus off, HDR plus on, and HDR plus advanced. If you hide this option, the camera will use HDR plus on at all times. One new feature this year is the ability to capture raw images. The phone will save both JPEG and RAW files together when the option is enabled. The good thing this year is that the camera app remembers your settings. When you close the app, the HDR plus or RAW settings remain where you left them. Unfortunately, the white balance settings do reset, which is probably for the best for most people but can be annoying if you use this control often. As with previous Pixel phones, the camera app still doesn't have any manual mode. Google relies heavily on computational photography that is entirely automated and controlled by the software. Even the RAW files you capture are not data from a single RAW frame but a file made from stacked RAW images. Google really wants to ensure you get the kind of images it wants you to have, and there is little scope for manual adjustments outside of adjusting the white balance and exposure. One cool new feature this year is focus tracking. When you tap on an object in the frame, the focus isn't locked at a particular point in the frame but on the subject itself. This means if the subject moves around in the frame or if you move the camera around while keeping the subject in frame, the focus will keep track and stay locked on the subject. This is extremely useful, especially for video but also for taking pictures of moving subjects such as pets or children. Like the previous Pixel phones, the Pixel 3 XL captures images constantly in the background when a camera is open. When the shutter is pressed, it stacks the last several images and creates a composite after correcting hand and subject movements. The images are captured underexposed, which allows the camera to capture the details in highlights and raise the shadows in post. Because it is capturing multiple images, the noise can be zeroed out after stacking, which allows it to push harder while raising the shadow detail. This is basically what happens when you take a picture on this phone with HDR plus on. The image quality was lauded on the previous two Pixels and is obviously also very good this year. There isn't a dramatic difference from last year, but you can still see some refinements, especially in the overall look of the images, which now looks a bit less processed and more like what a single shot, naturally wide, dynamic range image would look. In our testing, the 2x digital zoomed images from the Pixel 3 XL were some of the sharpest we have seen from any phone. Most of the time, The 2x digital zoom images on the Pixel 3 XL display look very similar to optically 2x zoomed images on other phones. For casual viewing and sharing online, these images are perfectly acceptable. Google has also introduced a new feature called Top Shot. This feature works automatically and doesn't require any user intervention. When the camera detects a moment when someone in the frame is blinking at the time when the shutter is pressed, or has an awkward expression, it will suggest one of the previous frames from its buffer instead. Only the picture. The first agenda will mostly fall to Google's excellent HDR+ algorithm and perfectly tuned software, as Google has retained the single rear camera of its predecessor. Interestingly, Google put a dual picture or no picture at all portrait mode is back once again, and works pretty much the same way it did last year. The Pixel 3 XL camera uses the depth information from the two photo sites on each pixel on the sensor to capture different perspectives, which creates a rough depth map. The camera then uses AI and machine learning to further refine edges of the subject and separate it from the background. The quality of portrait mode images is two-part. The first is the separation of the subject, which Google does really well, better even than some phones that have two cameras on the back. Most of the Pixel 3 XL portrait mode images have well-defined subject edges separating them from the background. As a bonus, it also works on most objects, unlike the portrait mode on the iPhone XR that only works with people. The other part is the quality of the background blur, which is okay on the Pixel 3 XL. The default strength of the background blur is a bit aggressive and looks somewhat unrealistic. You can adjust this, but only after the image has been captured. Google also don't make any special effort to make the point light sources in the background look like natural bokeh balls like some phones do. The blur also flows less smoothly as you go from foreground to background compared to something like the iPhone XS, which has a much finer stepping up of the blur as it moves into the distance, mimicking a real camera. Lastly, Google does not show a live preview of the background blur, and you only see it once the image has been captured. Every time you capture a portrait mode image, the camera saves two images, one with and one without the effect. There is no setting to change this behavior, so you always end with two images regardless of whether you want them or not.
Follow us. Google search. www.googlesearch.co.in. Facebook/blogtube page/ www.facebook.com web link. Twitter.com/blogtubebt. Twitter.com web link. If you like this video, click like icon and share your friends.
If you want more best videos, please subscribe and click bell icon.